On behalf of Rabbi Harari and Shadeh Shalom, I'd like to welcome Joey Mosseri as our guest speaker. Tonight's class is in memory of Minerva and Mitchell Saruya, David and Jenny Gamal, grandparents of our sponsor, Elliot and Jennifer Dweck. Also in memory of Fortuna Dweck, who unfortunately passed away yesterday, mother of Manny Dweck. For those of you who don't know Joey Mosseri, I'll quickly read the bio that was posted outside. Mr. Mosseri's expertise and knowledge spans many areas of interest related to Sephardim and the development of their culture, history, and halakha. His affinity for collecting rare and important books of Teshuvot and Sidurim has helped fuel his vast knowledge on these topics. He has a particular interest in the development and evolving nature of minhagim of all Sephardic communities. Well known in the community as an expert on the history of the Brooklyn Syrian community, as well as facets of Sephardic Hazanut, he is often consulted and interviewed by researchers and historians for his input and insight. His bio really doesn't do justice to Joey, as he has accomplished so much more, all this while running his family business at Doc's Pharmacy. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome, Joey Mosseri.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for coming out. Yeah, Victor already got it. Yeah, we're good. So, Pesach, Haggadah. We get together every year, we have this book, we read through it. You know, do we want to read through it, not go through it? Do we understand what's going on with it? Where did it come from? How did it develop? Is it really the same? You know, we always hear the rabbis telling us, or they teach us in school, you know, everything has been set up by the rabbis already from ancient times, and nothing can ever change. So I want to show you tonight how things have changed, and they've changed plenty, not only in the text of the Haggadah, but in what we do as well on the night of Pesach. So everything is based upon Pasuk in Shemot, V'higata lebencha, and that's why we call the Haggadah, from the Pasuk V'higata lebencha b'yom ha'hu lemor ba'abur zeh asa Adonai li b'seiti b'Misraim. All because of what God did for us with the Exodus. That's why, we have to tell it over to our sons, and continues from generation to generation. And as we know, even people that are completely unconnected to their Jewish roots know once a year they have to do this, Pesach Seder. Whether they follow it correctly or not, they're doing something, they're gathering for it. Now, how far back do we have a Haggadah? The earliest sources that we have that point to the format of the Haggadah as we know it today is the Mishnah. The Mishnah in Masechet Pesachim, in the 10th Perek, goes through all the different steps of the Haggadah. Tells you that, and it doesn't even tell you about Kiddush. Kiddush is taken for granted. That's something that you do on a holiday. All of a sudden, the first thing it starts talking about, it's talking about what you need to have on your table, what you're going to be dipping, what you're going to be drinking, what kind of questions need to be asked, what needs to be said, and finishing off the meal. That's all the Mishnah really tells us, but it gives us a basic framework of what's going on. Next, we hear about the Haggadah, of course, is in the Gemara. We have the Emoraim in the Gemara. We're talking about approximately the year, about between 300 and 400 of our common era. They're talking about the Gemara, about this Haggadah. So automatically that should tell you it's not something ancient, like people want you to believe it's something from Anshe Knesset HaGedolah. Anshe Knesset HaGedolah are the people that they tell us, put together our prayers and the Haggadah for us, and they were obviously at least 400 years earlier than that. So if they're still discussing it in the Gemara, and they're unsure as to what the format and what the words to be said in the Haggadah are, we know it's still under development. Later on, we see about it in the Geonim in the 9th century from Amram Gaon, Sa'adia Gaon, and we don't really have a extant written Haggadah until the 13th century, where we have a complete document. We have from Ashkenaz, we have from Sepharad, and in fact the first printed Haggadah, when the printing press first started, came from Spain, Guadalajara, Spain, from 1482. Now, going back to Anshe Knesset Gedolah, we said that the Gemara is talking about it between Rab and Shemuel in Masechet Pesachim. And this is about 250 years after the Anshe Knesset Gedolah ceased to exist. The Gemara talks about the main text of the Haggadah. You have to start with Genut and you have to complete with Shebach. In other words, you have to start talking about the low point of our history. And then you have to finally reach the conclusion of where we come out of the Exodus and where we're turned into a nation. So Rambam discusses it. If you see on your sheets over there, you have I believe it's on the second sheet. Where is it here? Should be on the second sheet, yeah. On the second sheet, page 2, it's, you have a section that starts Dalet and says, V'sarich le'adhid b'gnut. I believe it's like the fourth paragraph on your page. V'sarich le'adhid b'gnut u'tsayim b'shebach. Kesad, מתחיל ומספר שבתחילה היו אבותינו בימי תרח ומלפניו כופרים וטועים אחרי ההבל ורודפים עבודה זרה. ומסיים בדת האמת שקרבנו הקדוש ברוך הוא לה והבדילנו מן הטועים וקרבנו לייחודו. So he's telling you that you have to start in the beginning of the Haggadah talking about how our forefathers were back in the days of Terah, the father of Abraham Avinu. We were nothing. We had no connection to Borei Olam. We were worshippers of Avodah Zarah. We chased after nonsense. And finally, you have to get down to the end, Mesayim Bedat HaEmet. Yeah, we finally conclude when we get to the true religion that Borei Olam, Hashem brought us to it when He took us out of Misraim and He gave us the Torah. And he continues Harambam. מתחיל ומודיע שהעבדים היינו לפרעה במצרים. And we have to talk about how we were slaves. And all the evil that Paro did to us and the Egyptians did to us while we were there as slaves. And we have to conclude with all the miracles that were done for us and how we were freed. This whole section of Arami Obed Abi is probably the section of the Haggadah that nobody pays attention to. It's in the middle of the Haggadah. It's the part that most people don't know by heart. You just see a bunch of Pisukim after Pisukim after Pisukim. It's 3-4 pages. You look, everybody's looking ahead. Okay, we got to spill the wine soon. We got to spill the wine soon. Nobody's paying attention. Nobody cares. And Harambam is telling us that's the most important part. That is the part that the Hachamim decided that's what they have to talk about. We'll get back to that a little later. So, what's going on? First, he tells us that Harambam is telling us, talk about Metahillah, and he's talking about how we were idol worshippers. And then he goes on and tells us, Abadim Hayinu, we were slaves. So, which one is the Genut and which one is the Shebach? The Genut, is it that we were idol worshippers, or was it that we were slaves? And is the Shebach that we got to the true religion, or is the Shebach that we became free men? So this goes back to the argument in the Gemara that I was referring to before. So, in our printed Gemara today, it says that Rab says you have to start from Metahillah, Obdei Avodah Zarah. That we have to talk about the spiritual low point and the spiritual high point. And then Shemuel talks about Abadim Hayinu, the physical low point about being slaves, and then the physical high of getting freed. But older Gemara manuscripts that were extant, or readily available to Hachamim until about 500 years ago, and now we have, we've discovered many of them, show that this argument wasn't between Rab and Shemuel, it was between Abaye and Rabbah. And Abu Dirham, who was a major Hacham in Spain, in Toledo, Spain, in the 1300s, points to this argument and says it definitely had to be between Abaye and Rabbah. And he says, basically what happened is that they didn't want to diss either one of these great Hachamim, so they made a conglomeration in our Haggadah, including both sections. So there was, initially, according to Abu Dirham, There was a Haggadah that only had the Abadim section, the way we know it right after Manishtana. And there was a Haggadah that did not have the Abadim section at all and started a couple of pages later from Mitahillah. And the Mitahillah's Haggadah didn't have the Abadim section and vice versa. The reason he gives is that, so why did they choose to put the Abadim section before the Mitahillah section? We have a general rule when we look for halachot in the Gemara. If there's an argument between Abaye and Rabbah, we have to follow Rabbah. The opinion of Rabbah always rules. And since Rabbah said that you have to have what you call, you have to do the Abadim section, so therefore we put the Abadim section first in our Haggadot today. And so right after Menashah, we do the Abadim section and we go through the 4 sons, we finish that, and we start with the Mitahillah section. Also, in the last 100 years, they found many documents and ancient writings in the Cairo Geniza, and it shows us that the Haggadot that they had, even up to 900 years ago, were much shorter than the Haggadah that we have today, and even shorter than the Haggadot of the Geonim. We all think that our Haggadah is our Haggadah, and it's the same thing. But they were much shorter, and we'll get to, at the end of the document, you'll see that we deal with, that I put down for you, different sections of the Haggadah, and who says what to say, who says not to say it, who doesn't include it in their Haggadah. And there are, again, according to these Genizah sections, even shorter things.
Joe,
Yes, talk to me.
it sounds like up to the time of Rambam, there isn't a codified Haggadah.
There is not. Well, there is a codified Haggadah. Amram Gaon had a codified Haggadah. Sa'adiyah Gaon had a codified Haggadah. Rambam had a codified
That's
Haggadah.
my next thing. So it sounds like there's conflicting Haggadot in existence.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. But prior to that was much more conflicting.
Uh-huh.
Okay, everybody basically had a family tradition of what they said and what they didn't say, and that was it. But everybody agreed upon certain parts that were definitely said. And we'll see that coming up. Also in the Haggadah, you have a section that starts Baruch HaMakom Baruch Hu. We know it as, 2-3 lines, but some of the older Haggadot have that as a very lengthy section where it even parallels our current form of Baruch She'amar that we say every morning. Okay? The section of the 4 sons in most old Haggadot doesn't exist at all. You didn't have Hacham, Rasha, Sha'nei Yeshol, Tam, any of them. They were all completely omitted from the Haggadah. It had no place at all. It was a later explanation. So if you really go back and look at the old Haggadot, and somebody, for whatever reason, needs a short Haggadah, and Sa'adiyah Gaon's version, who's considered a pretty short Haggadah, is still too long for you. Yeah, you have Genizah documents where you'd be saying Kiddush, from there you go to Manishtana, from there you skip to Mitahillah, from there Baruch Shamar Habtahato, Hi She'amda, Se'umad, Rabban Gamliel, and you're done. There's no Dayenu, there's no Kama'ala Kavod, there's no Rabbi Yosef HaGelili. All those sections completely, omitted. And it's not like we're looking to reform something and take it out and say we don't need it anymore. It's something that actually existed. It's something that was done by the Hachamim over time. Like everything else we know, people add, they embellish, they want to, I don't know, I wouldn't say get more religious. Nowadays it's a thing of getting more religious. Back then they were actually, it was based upon different family traditions and the different traditions of different Hachamim, different yeshivot. And later on they got combined.
Joey?
Yes.
So today's Haggadah, because it's long, isn't it better?
Is it better?
Well,
Well, I'm not telling you it's better or it's not better. It's something that if we went back to Harambam, he might say, what is this?
yeah.
I'm not familiar with it.
But the more you talk about these things, the more we should back.
Of course, but does it have to be part of the text itself instead of discussion over dinner? Okay? It doesn't nobody said you have to, sit and stretch out the Haggadah for 6 hours before you get up to Hamusi.
Right.
Okay, so, obviously everything has to be taken, properly. I'm not telling anybody to omit everything. I'm still sticking to the same text. But let's say somebody finds himself in a situation where they have to cut, corners for whatever reason. Okay, so at least you know you're doing something within the framework of the Hakamim. So now back to what we said before. Rambam, as we read, and is based upon the Mishnah and based upon the Gemara, you have to take that section of Arami Obed Abi, and you have to be Doresh. Okay? So they're only talking about that section, not about other sections, just so you know. That entire section, okay, hinges upon just 4 Pesukim. 4 Pesukim from beginning of Parashat Kitabo is what the bulk of our Haggadah discusses. So the Pasuk says, Vayered Misraima, Vayachor Sham B'mte Me'ad, Vahisham Lechoy Gadol Asum Varab. And then the next Pasuk, Vayare'u Tanu HaMisrim, Vay'amnunu, Vayitinu Alinu Abadat Chasha, ונשעק אל אדוני אלוהי אבותינו וישמע אדוני את פקודנו וירא את עוניינו ואת עמדנו ואת חסנו. And then finally, ויוציאנו אדוני ממצרים ביד חזקה ובזרוע נטויה ובמונה גדול ובוטות ובמופתים. So this is the style of the Hachamim. Today when you think the Hacham is going to give you an explanation, he's going to give you a derasha, he's going to start making things up. He's going to start pulling out a Rashi from here, a Barbanel from there. He's going to pull out Seforno. He's going to give you all different types of explanations. But if you look at the text of the Haggadah, you see the Hachamim did the Derasha of these Pesukim from Pesukim. So if you look at, you take Vayered Misraima Vayachor Sham. Okay, Vayered Misraima. And Wusal Piyad Dibur. He starts explaining it, and then he quotes you another Pasuk. Each portion of the Pasuk is explained with another Pasuk from the Torah, or from the Nibi'im, or from the Ketuvim, depending on what the case may be. In the case of the Haggadah, it's generally from the Torah itself. So they're just taking these 4 Pesukim, and they're just taking each word and showing you how it's connected in some way to our story of our development from another pasuk in the Torah. This, like I said, this is stated in Harambam, which is quoting the Mishnah for us, and it's an integral part of the Haggadah. It's the part, like I said, everybody skips, and it shouldn't be skipped. It's the part that you really need to look into. Open up Devarim Perek Kavav, the 26th Perek, and look at Pesukim 5, 6, 7, and 8, and see what they're about. That's what the Haggadah is about. That is how we became from nothing into something. I just love the way it works. How, once again, they take Pesukim to explain Pesukim. Nothing else. No, I learned this in school. I learned that in school. The rabbi taught me. My murah told me. It's nothing like that. The Torah is teaching the Torah. The Torah explains the Torah. It's the one and only way. So that's basically for the text of the Haggadah. Now, actually, what goes on that night? Let's start with the most common thing. You think of Pesach, you think about food, you think about wine, you think about everybody sitting around the table. Everybody starts thinking about the ki'ara, the tray. There was no tray. Tray did not exist. The Mishnah doesn't mention a tray. The Gemara doesn't mention a tray. There's no ki'ara in any of the Geonim, no ki'ara in Harambam. Ki'ara does not exist whatsoever. Okay, this whole thing, get the tray, you look at the picture in the Haggadah, see how you're going to set everything up. It's a fallacy. Never happened. If you look at your sheets, I think on the first page, okay, you see that first page? See that picture? It's a table. The food was set up on the table. So I took a picture out of a very old Haggadah. And that's the way the food is. Here's your table. Set the food up and leave it like that. You don't have to take the tray away. You don't have to carry it. You don't have to send, the oldest single G out of the room. Doesn't have to happen. Okay? You want to do it. It gets you nice, fun and exciting, and if somebody thinks they're getting married out of it, no problem. Enjoy. But you don't have to do it.
Joey, is there a Kabbalah source for this at all, or is it?
Is there a Kabbalah source? The Kabbalah source is to what order to place things in. Even this picture you see in front of you at this table, it's set up according to the Kabbalah's placement. But according to the early sources, you place the items closest to you in the order that you would be using them.
Where do we get it all from?
Where do we get all what from?
The Kara,
We'll get to that.
the oldest girl, all these.
Let's do one thing at a time. Okay.
Joe, you know you're gonna be in trouble after Pesach, right? Everybody's gonna go home and say, Joey said not to do this.
I didn't say not to do anything. I'm just letting you know what they did. You can do whatever you like.
You're in
Arthur.
trouble, Joe. Watch the backlash.
It's all right. Don't worry about it. Okay, so the placement of the items on the table was as per use. The first time we see the ki'ara is in the Tur. The Tur was the son of the Rosh. The Rosh was a rabbi who originated in Germany. He ran away to Toledo, Spain, approximately the end of the 13th century. His son was the Tur, and he first writes that you have to have a ki'ara. That's the first source for it. So before approximately 1325 Spain, Toledo, Spain, northern Spain, you don't hear about a ki'ara whatsoever in any source. And he tells you, on this ki'ara, what do you have? And he doesn't tell you to place it in any special order. Put 3 masot, maror, haroset, some other vegetables, and 2 cooked foods. Again, there's no mention about a zeroah, no mention about an egg. Doesn't tell you what the other vegetables are or why you have other vegetables. The most famous early Haggadah is the Cincino Haggadah of 1486. He also mentions over there the ki'ara, and he tells us everything that the Tur tells us, but he also tells us that on this ki'ara, to add, instead of using the word maror, he uses the word hazeret, and he also tells us to put fish, and eggs, and walnuts, and acorns. Okay, so now we have a whole conglomeration, a whole bunch of different foods, vegetables, nuts, but we don't know why they're there.
People were okay switching over?
People were okay switching over, because again, it all had to do with what you did in your family. It wasn't, I went to class today and they told me, no, you can only do it this way. Pesach was always a family tradition. It goes back to what was done in the Torah when you read about Pesach. Pesach was all about joining together with family, with neighbors, with friends, and it's something that we all still do. It's the one holiday where everybody always makes sure to always have lots of, of family and friends at their table. It was done when you had to have the Korban Pesach. You had to all chip in together and to eat it together. It's what kept, the unity among the people. It was a very, very important thing. And because you had the unity, you didn't have the fighting and the bickering over things like that, like you probably have today in a lot of homes when it comes to Pesach. Your food's not kosher enough, you following the list, you're not following the list. There's all types of different things like that. It's all about unity. Pesach brings the nation together. It's a very, very important concept. So, we said that the Tur tells us to have 3 masot. Right? Everybody has 3 masot? Well, not the Geonim, not Rambam. They didn't have 3 masot. 2 masot only. Okay? Only for Shabbat, they would have 3. And they wouldn't use all of them. Harambam has 2, and he tells you, when you use them, when we get up to it, we're going to cut off half of 1 masah, and we're just going to leave it there. Nobody's going to eat it. We're only using 1.5. We're poor people. The Geonim talk about the same thing, and the only reason they added extra on Shabbat for lechem mishneh of Shabbat. Pesach is Yom Tov, you don't need lechem mishneh, they tell us. The next item that they tell us.
How is 3 lechem mishneh?
3. It's not, what do you call it? You have the extra. In other words, if you're going to have 1.5 to do hamosi, that's not enough. You don't have lechem mishneh, and that's why you have an extra 1 in your hand. Okay, haroset. Okay, my mother makes the best haroset. My grandmother, may she rest in peace, made the best. Everybody talks about their haroset. I make it with dates. I make it with apples. I make it with raisins. You know what? They don't care what you make it with. They want it to be thick. Haroset has to be thick. That's the main criteria that they talk about. They want you to add spices to it, add cinnamon, add ginger. They want you to add, things that are sharp in taste to it. And they want you to add wine vinegar. Now imagine how bad your haroset would taste today if you put vinegar in it. But this was something that they insisted on, putting wine vinegar. The haroset had to have a certain bite, the tang to it. Vegetables. What vegetables do we have? We have a piece of celery, we have some romaine lettuce, and we're done. Back to the Geonim. They tell us use romaine lettuce. In fact, romaine lettuce is reserved strictly for one of the choices for maror. You could use regular lettuce, you could use watercress, you could use celery, you could use cilantro. You even have other rabbis saying use parsley or mint. Again, these are all rabbis living and operating in the Middle East 1,000 years ago, over 1,000 years ago. But karpas became the choice, word for celery. It doesn't have to be celery, but only because it works in Arabic that it's the same word, okay, same letters, so it remains the choice. But why karpas? What's with this word karpas and what's its connection to Pesach? Karpas, you think of the word pas, and pas makes you think of ketonet pasim. The ketonet pasim was the multicolored cloak that Yaakov gave to Yosef to wear, and because he gave him this cloak, that's what started all our troubles, bringing us down to Egypt and began the whole story of the Exodus. Again, the Hachamim connecting Pesukim. Everything was always connected to our historical memory through a Pasuk in the Torah. Another reason that they liked the concept of celery, because a lot of what we know of the Haggadah, as we said, we talked about the Mishnah and the Gemara, it was all based upon living through the Roman Empire and their rule in the Middle East. And in the Roman times, especially the days of the Mishnah, victorious Romans coming out of battle or coming out of the arena after, conducting we'll call it a kill, they would wear a wreath on their head. And that wreath was always a wreath of celery leaves. Celery leaves was the wreath of the victorious. And now we, Am Yisrael, we're leaving, we're leaving Egypt, we are victorious. So again, to connect to that, we eat celery. We have celery on the table. Another interesting explanation that some of the Geonim gave, and I was surprised when I read this the other night. We were slaves. Because we were slaves, our bodies were very, very weary, but not just weary, they were swollen. And because they were swollen, we needed something to work as an anti-inflammatory. Celery is an anti-inflammatory. I found that very funny when I was reading.
Not giving it out.
Yeah, right? I can't sell it. Okay, so I mentioned to you that the Hachamim never mentioned anything about zeroa or an egg. They just keep talking about two cooked foods. What are these two cooked foods? Okay, you can be very surprised. The Gemara tells us the two cooked foods. In fact, if you open up Masechet Pesachim on page 114b, Rab Huna says, bring two foods to your table. Silqa ve'aroza, Swiss chard and rice. Can anybody tell me you can't have rice for Pesach now? The Gemara is telling you straight out that's one of the main foods to have on your table for Pesach. You have to have rice. The Gemara continues. As we know, the Gemara is always the Hachamim arguing with each other. Who says what? Right away, Rabbah and Rabbi Asher come and say, well, if Rab Huna said you have to have sila and rice, that's what we have to have. That's it. So you have Rab Huna and Rabbah and Rabbi Asher all saying the same thing. It's something you have to have. And then you have Rabbi Hiskiah tell you, no, you don't have to have that. You could have fish and an egg. It's good enough. Rabbi Yosef says, no, just have two different cuts of meat. Rabbi Yonah says, why do you have to have two pieces of meat? Just have, the meat and the sauce that it was cooked in. So, in other words, anything you have on your ki'ara is good. Went to the butcher, he ran out of zeroa. It's not a problem. You don't have to have a zeroah. Some of the Rishonim spoke about having 3 cooked foods instead, corresponding to Moshe, Aharon, and Miriam, again, because of the pasuk. There was a pasuk in Micha Nabi. The pasuk says, "Va'ishlach lefanecha et Moshe, Aharon, u'Miriam." We don't have a pasuk in the entire Torah that brings all 3 of them together as saviors, but in the Nabi, it talks about it. Now, with the Mekubalim and with the trend to look for more salvation and, connecting the salvation of the Geulah of Misraim to the final Geulah, you had some people that said, yes, you have to have 3 things, and it has to be fish and something related to poultry, whether it's a piece of chicken or an egg, as well as beef. Because all these 3 things can correspond to the 3 items that are going to be brought to the final meal of the salvation, which are known as the Leviathan, which is a great sea monster corresponding to the fish, the Ziz, which is supposedly some sort of mythical bird. When it spreads its wings, it covers the sun, and Shor Habar, which is a tremendous bull. And these are the 3 great foods that the Hachamim are going to eat in the future salvation. Once again, no zeroah. First mention of the zeroah is in France in around 1300. How did it creep in? Like I mentioned to you before. Same thing with the Rosh. He came from Germany. Other Hachamim left Germany and France. They got into Spain. They, of course, as we have today, new rabbi came to town. Let's bring him in. Let's have a class. Let's see what he has to say. And people just listen and follow suit. And the rabbi said, do this. By that time, it was all about following the rabbis. No offense, Rabbi, but I mean it in a way where they stopped thinking for themselves and they just followed blindly. So they were following, and by the time the expulsion came, this memory remained of the teaching of the Rosh and the rabbis like the Rosh and his students. And once Shulchan Aruch, it'd be Yosef Karo Maran compiled the Shulchan Aruch. This became common knowledge among the people. They were already doing it for 150, 200 years, and it became commonplace, and that's why we now have eggs and zeroah. But why an egg? Why an egg? Why did we decide to go with an egg? The Yemenites still today don't have an egg. They have 2 pieces of meat on their, on their table. They don't use a kiara either.
Because it's filling?
Because it's filling? You get full on an egg?
No.
Didn't think so. 2 reasons. The night of Pesach, okay, is always the same night as Tisha B'Av, the night of mourning. Okay, you associate eggs with a mourner. First meal that the mourner eats is an egg. That night of Pesach is always the night of Tisha B'Av. So this year Pesach's Friday night, Tisha B'Av falls Friday night. But since you can't have the fast on Shabbat, we push it off to Saturday night. Another reason is we actually mention mourning in the Haggadah. Right? Somebody? V'hosi'anu me'abdut le'herut u'm'sha'ibut l'g'ulah u'miyagun l'simha u'me'ebel l'yom tov. We mention the abilut. So to connect, everything else in the Haggadah is happy, and we have some sort of connection to it on everything we have on our table. This is the only thing we don't have, and that's where the egg comes in again. Ebel l'yom tov. Another thing mentioned throughout.
Why the connection to Tisha B'Av?
Why the connection to Tisha B'Av?
Here we are in happiest night of the year. You can
Right.
argue, right? You're getting freedom. You're supposed to relive your freedom.
You're supposed to relive your freedom. Great. So you're supposed to relive the freedom. Again, it's a bunch of steps. We got out of Misraim. We got into the desert. We're supposed to go into Eretz Israel. What happened? Send the spies into Eretz Israel. And then all of a sudden, no, it's no good. Let's complain about it. And it became known as Bechia Lidorot. That day, that night became known as Day of Crying for Generations. What's it known to us today as Tisha B'Av? So again, it's connected to Yesiat Misraim. It's all connected. You can't have a night of history. And that's what Pesach is, a night of history, where you're relaying the history to your family, to your children, to your grandchildren, and remember only one part, not remember the other part. Everything's tied in, it comes in full circle. Another interesting thing that comes up in the writings of the Hachamim, they talk about egozim and kedayot. You have to have walnuts and acorns on the table. Mishnah talks about it, Gemara talks about it, Rambam talks about it, even the Shulchan Aruch talks about it. First, Halakha and Shulchan Aruch, if you open up Siman Taf Ayin Bet, first thing he tells you, you have to mizvah, in fact, use the word mizvah to bring nuts to the table for the kids. Anybody have nuts at home on Tisha B'Av? I mean on Pesach, I'm sorry. See? Thank you, Eli. All right, I think I saw a bunch of lists today that tell you that nuts are hames now, but the Hachamim had nuts on them. Bottom line is, it's really to keep the kids busy more than anything else. You had nuts. They didn't come in a bag shelled already. You didn't go to the store and buy them. You had the kids that played with them. They rolled around like marbles, whatever they may have done with them. But it's interesting that Shulchan Aruch calls it a mizvah. All right. All right. Back to the different foods. As I said, the Yemenites. Yeah,
When we
sorry.
eat the egg, we said Dechele Korban Hagida.
We're going to get to that very soon. As I mentioned, the Yemenites till today do not have this concept of zeroa and eggs. They follow Harambam almost to the letter, and they have two cooked meats on the table. And the two cooked meats are there on the table, one of them being cooked, regular cooked, and one is grilled or roasted. And now going to Eli Zaytuni's point over here about what do we say. So we get to that point, we finished the musi, the masa, the maror, the korech, and while we're getting ready to eat our meal, so we have the besa, and we're saying Zecher le Korban Hagida. Okay, the Yemenites would be saying it on a different piece of meat. Okay, they have two pieces of meat in front of them. The question is, why are we doing this at all? Okay, so it's not really going to explain why it's Zecher le Korban Hagida, but we know that every holiday had a festive sacrifice, and that's Korban Hagida. That's the sacrifice of the holiday, and that's what you got to eat from. Pesach, you had two. You had the one for the beginning of the meal, which was this festive sacrifice, and then you had the Korban Pesach, which was eaten later on, while you're already satiated, while you're already full, and everybody would just be picking off little pieces at the end as a type of dessert to finalize the night. The Hagiyah we associate now with the egg, and the Korban Pesach, obviously, with the lamb shank. Okay, you're not going to say the lamb shank is considered the Hagiyah, correct? So therefore, we do the Hagiyah first, and we say it as a remembrance. And after we do that, now we're technically finished with our meal. Okay, we went through, right? We had masa, we had maror, we had a sandwich, right? We had the korech as a sandwich, and then you're having this egg. And now we're finished our meal technically in that sense, and that's where we would have the zeroa and say Zecher le Korban Pesach for those who want to say Zecher le Korban Pesach. But it has to be the final thing. The meal is a whole separate issue whatsoever, because again, this is all things to be done in remembrance of what was. Haggadah starts. Let's go back for a second to the beginning of the Haggadah. Everybody knows we start the Haggadah and we start singing Kadesh Urhas, correct? Kadesh Urhas didn't exist. Kadesh Urhas exists as we know it today because it fit tunes that people put to it. but there are at least 6 or 7 other versions of these, headlines for what's coming up next. In fact, if you get to the point that we know as Yahas, the breaking of the Masa, okay, right before we do our Mish'ar Tam, Yahas didn't exist among the Geonim or among Harambam. They did not cut the Masa early on. They only cut the Masa when they got to making Hamosi on it, which is after you've read the whole Haggadah and you're going to start the eating. Sa'adeh Gaon. Sa'adeh Gaon has in his Siddur a very, very long Kiddush. Let's say our Kiddush is 1 page, his Kiddush over there is 3 pages long. And everybody, when they found this, they said, what is this strange thing? Nobody knows about it, nobody says it. Lo and behold, the Jews of the island of Jerba is an island off of Tunis, of Tunisia, till today, that's the only Kiddush they know on Pesach. And that's the Kiddush that they say. And they never knew where it came from, they never knew it had an origin. And now they see that it's an ancient, because they only found the Sa'adeh Gaon writings about 100, 150 years ago. So until that point, nobody knew where it came from, and they've been saying it for well over 1,000 years. So again, our connection to the past. Many of the things that we have, we've lost, and many things have been, saved and treasured by various communities in different places. Another point, let's say, in the Halabi tradition, if you look at the only Haggadah ever printed in Halab, it was printed in 1897 in Aleppo, right after Manishtana, before Abadim Hayinu, there's a couple of words in Arabic. Okay, so finish, okay, and then it says, Hada il Jawab. This is the response, this is the answer. And then it goes to Abadim Hayinu. We only find that, once again, in the Haggadah of Sa'adeh Gaon. Sa'adeh Gaon has exactly the same thing. He ends Manishtana and says, Hada al-Jawab. This is the answer. Okay, and many old-time Halabiyas still say it in their homes till today. Kadesh Urhas. Urhas, right? Everybody wash your hands without beracha, right? Wrong again. Wrong again. Okay? The sheets in front of you, I don't have to read it to you. You can look it up yourself. You have all of Shulchan Aruch and Rambam there on the points that we're talking about. You have, according to Harambam and according to the Geonim, you have to wash your hands with a beracha. There's no such thing as not washing with a beracha. The only time they talked about washing hands without beracha, before Kiddush. They had a washing before the Kiddush even happened. And that was without a beracha. At this point, they washed with a beracha. We get up to the...
How did that change?
How did that change?
Yeah, what made that change?
Rabbi Meir Rottenberg, a Ashkenazi rabbi, didn't like the fact that they were washing before Kiddush. He saw no point in making a beracha at this point because he felt, and this is something that's fairly common among many Ashkenazi poskim till today, that they don't see it as as obligatory to wash hands before dipping. Dipping, according to the halakha, the way we know it, is if you're going to dip something in one of 7 different types of liquids, you have to wash. And it wasn't a commonplace halakha, and there's so no point in washing at all. But if you're going to wash, maybe it's a beracha lebatala, if you're going to make a beracha on it, so let's stop the beracha. And that's where it stopped. But until that point, and until that became common among all poskim, you won't find anybody today telling you to go make the beracha. Okay, we all now wash the hands without a beracha before this point.
But why would you say beracha twice? Why would you say a beracha twice?
What do you mean?
You're saying that we should say a beracha, and then we wash our hands again with a beracha. What's the point of doing it twice?
Because you may have gotten your hands dirty, you may have taken your mind off the beracha of what you did because you got so engrossed in the Haggadah. So one thing has nothing to do with the other anymore. By that point, everybody shook each other's hands, everybody's talking, everybody's passing food around to each other for whatever reason. Again, it wasn't that, you're going to see, karpas nowadays, they tell you in the Haggadah, Rabbi, how much karpas you have to eat now? What do they tell you nowadays? No.
I'm not the rabbi, right?
I'm not the rabbi either. That's your title. All right, they tell you nowadays, You have to eat less than kazayit. Make sure you eat less than kazayit. Don't eat too much. Make sure it's a tiny amount. That way you're not obligated to say beracha harona. Okay, and that way it's a continuation, and keep it in mind for later on, for the maror, so you don't have to make another beracha adama. We know all the answers already, right? Did I get it right, Rabbi?
You got it right.
Okay, perfect. I just want to make sure. So back then, they didn't limit themselves to a tiny piece. They ate as much karpas as they wanted. Okay, and if they wanted to keep eating, through the first few paragraphs of the Haggadah, that also didn't bother them. They went along with it, and when they finished, they did say beracha harona. Okay, so now
You have to redo
you
it.
finish that, and now you have to do everything else later on again. The karpas, what do you dip it in?
Salt water.
Salt water,
We do this.
vinegar,
Lemon juice.
lemon juice. How about haroset?
Not for the beracha.
The second dip.
The second dip. Well, what time is that second dip, Michael?
Middle of the paragraph.
Oh, well, sorry to say, once again, everything has changed. They dipped exclusively in haroset. They didn't have lemon juice, they didn't have salt water, they didn't have vinegar. Only haroset was used for dipping. The karpas was dipped in haroset. The hamosi was dipped in haroset. The korech was dipped, the maror was dipped in haroset. The korech was dipped in haroset. All four dippings that you have, haroset. That's what was used. Haroset had vinegar, yes. Haroset had vinegar. So therefore, what happened? No, it's not all covered. That's how we got to vinegar today. The Tosafot, okay, it didn't like the fact that we're using the haroset so early on. He wanted to leave it as something special for when you get up to maror, and therefore he said, stop using the haroset, just use the vinegar part of the haroset, and that's how we got to vinegar. There are really no early sources for using salt water whatsoever. It seems that it came out of using the vinegar hundreds of years later, where people didn't have vinegar. So they wanted something to replicate, somewhat the taste of the vinegar. So then we started using salt water. But vinegar was only an offshoot from the haroset. They were also using the vinegar in the haroset to kill off any bugs that may have been on the karpas. And according to the Benu Ha'ayega on, they used it because vegetables would give them gas, and the vinegar would kill that off too. You laugh, but I'm telling you what the Hakarim are telling us. Okay, they were all into these things. They didn't have doc's pharmacy, no, they had to use natural medicine. Okay. Okay, so I said they ate the karpas, they ate as much as they wanted. They said bori nefashot. Yahas, I mentioned to you that they did not do yahas at all until they got up to Mosi Masa. That's where they cut it. Throughout all this, we have take away the tray, don't leave the tray, go to the kitchen with the tray. None of that existed, obviously. Now, who read the Haggadah? What was done with the Haggadah? Did they go around the table? Did they all say it together?
Head of the house,
Head of the house.
only.
Only, exactly, you got it right.
And the father,
Only the head of the house would read the Haggadah. Everybody would sit, listen, pay attention. Even the berachot, okay, let's say alachya maror, only he would say it, and they would answer amen. There was no such thing as the people participating. You were there to listen. The head of the household was there to relay every last detail to you, and you were there to just listen, accept, nod, and record it in your minds to be able to do the same in the future. Even manishtana, only he would answer. The head of the household would answer the manishtana. The only part of the Haggadah where everybody was involved in was the Hallel. Only Hallel. Not even then.
Not even Diana.
No, Dayenu didn't exist. Dayenu did not exist. You won't find Dayenu among the Geonim, you won't find Dayenu among Rambam. It doesn't exist. You can open up the Mishneh Torah of Rambam till today, you will not find it there. There were other sources for it where it was something that others say, but it's not necessarily part of the Haggadah service. So if you wanted to say it, you could, but it wasn't part of the text. If you went to the bookstore to buy, Haggadah back then, it wasn't there. You would have to buy, the unabridged version.
So you're saying all these things that weren't there or never existed, and
It's a history class. I'm giving you a history. I'm not telling you to change what you're doing. Okay?
That's what I'm asking. I know it's kind of a crazy thing to say, but let's say somebody really wants to go back and I'm not saying because you taught it, but
Don't invite me.
no, listen, you learn new things tonight. You learn new things tonight. You want to do things, maybe you want to go back and do things differently than you do it now, and do things that were done way back when. And I mean, are you covered? Are you not covered?
Are you covered? You're absolutely covered. But you're
you
bucking.
look like
You're
ridiculous
bucking
to
tradition.
everybody.
No, you're bucking tradition. You basically, you're turning around to your father, to your grandfather, and saying, you know what? Screw you.
Right.
That's what you're doing. It's not nice. This is what the family does. This is what you've been doing. It has sources. It's not like, somebody created out of the clear blue sky and, said, you know what? This year, we're going to make our masab blue. Okay? We're going to add food coloring to our masab.
Not only that.
It's not what you do.
Right, it's not true.
Even then, even in the days of the Geonim, each one did it differently.
Each one did it differently.
100 years of each other, they all did it differently.
Mhm.
So it's just, it's family traditions.
It's family tradition. So now your tradition developed among your family. You know what you grew up seeing. You know what your father grew up seeing. At the very least, you know at least 2 generations of what was going on, and nobody ever questioned it. So who are you to come along and start, tossing it out?
But that doesn't make it obligatory.
No, it's not. I'm not telling you it's obligatory. Like I said,
40 years.
but that's why I said, if you're in a pinch and for whatever reason you need to do
If
something,
you want to go back to the original, first we look at the Mishnah.
right?
Either man Mishnah, 3 questions or whatever. But
We're going to get to that.
you
We're not
wanna-
finished with
but
that.
You want to go back to the original. You're not bucking the system. You're just going back to the sources.
You're going back
saying
to the
it's as
sources.
recent as
But here,
100 years ago.
all right. Let's take
The
for
changes
example.
are as recent as 100 years ago.
Again,
So that's
maybe.
not a tradition.
We said Sa'adiyah Gaon's writings we didn't have until about 100, 150 years ago. We don't know what else we haven't found yet also. And what sources may come and,
But
turn
Dayenu,
everything I've said
Dayenu
tonight
an
on its head.
Ashkenazic edition?
I'm sorry?
Dayenu, I believe, is an Ashkenazic.
No, it's not Ashkenazic. It existed among the Geonim, but as something, as an additional item to say if you wanted to.
Right, so if you don't say it now, big deal.
Right.
You're saying it's tradition. You're worrying about breaking tradition. But if it's something that they say, they didn't say, okay, next. It's not it's not mandatory and halachic and obligatory.
No, it's not
I
halachic.
think you just wanted to say it's okay for you to cut it.
No, I'm
No,
just trying to say,
it's not halachic at all.
I'm just trying
We're
to
not
say.
telling you that al pi halacha you must say, the entire book. You must pick up the
Yeah.
Haggadah and say, I have to say the entire book. No, you don't have to say the entire book. But there are definitely sections that you must say,
Okay.
and there are concepts there that you must say. And over time, different hachamim may have interjected other portions to give a clearer definition of what it is, and it became traditional to say it. That's all I'm telling you.
I think it's going to be on a lot of people's minds this Pesach.
Good. That's a good thing.
I think Joey's stepping out to do it.
Okay, no problem.
I'm going to use you.
You can do whatever you like. Mishar Tam came from a later section in the Haggadah that says, "B'chodo v'ador hayav adam leharot et asmo ki'ilu yasam Mitzrayim." In every generation,
The head of the table do it, why does the whole?
hayav kol adam leharot et asmo. Every
She wants
person.
you to do everything.
No problem.
Just say it.
Not a problem. That's easy. Okay. So this part. So I was saying that the only portion in the Haggadah where everybody was involved was in the Hallel. In fact, the Hachamim tell us, and there's something you find again in the Geonim and in the Rambam and in other early Rishonim, you find that Hallel is where everybody was involved. But how were they involved? Not by saying the Hallel. The head of the household would say the Hallel, and after every pasuk of the Hallel, they would have to respond, Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Every pasuk, Hallelujah. And that's the way they were involved in it. Basically, they were saying, praise the Lord. Everything, praise the Lord, praise the Lord. That's what Hallel was. It's all praise, it's all Shebah to Borei Olam. Okay, AB was mentioning Manishtanna. Manishtanna, how many questions? We all know it's 4 questions, right? You have a book that has 5? Does your book have 5 or 4? Thank you. So, the Mishnah, the way we know it, okay, in the Talmud Babli has 4 questions. In the Talmud Yerushalmi, it's only 3 questions. Rambam has 5 questions. Okay? And then in the Genizah documents, in the Haggadot from there are only 2 questions. Okay, so there is a Manishtanah. Maybe, how many questions are you going to be saying? Maybe just 2?
Skipping the whole thing.
Skip the whole thing. Well, I don't have a source to skip the whole thing. Everybody has Manishtanah. Halach Ma'anya doesn't exist though. That's a later edition. So maybe you want to skip that. Okay. Hallel. Many people ask every year, Hallel, why do, we say, Safun Barech, Hallel Nirsa. When we get to that portion of Hallel, it's only half the Hallel. We said half the Hallel before the second cup of wine. I forgot to mention, every cup of wine among the Geonim and among Harambam, every cup had a beracha, before and after. Okay, you had Hagefen and Al Hagefen afterwards. Every one of the 4 cups. Something extra to say now.
Makes sense.
I know, pick and choose. Okay, so the Hallel, why do we split it before the meal and after the meal? I'm only able to find one real source that discusses it. And it says that each time that we drink wine, it's glorified in some way. The first cup of wine is the Kiddush. The Kiddush itself is a glorification. If you look at the words, and everything, all that. This third cup of wine, you have Birkat HaMazon. Once again, it's a glorification because it's the only beracha that we're obligated to say from the Torah, from the written text of Echalta Sabata or Berachta. It's a glorification. The fourth cup of...
The second cup is prior to...
I said the third cup. I didn't say the second cup. The fourth cup, we say on the Hallel. As we know, Hallel Nisa, and that's the last cup. So because the second cup has nothing, we're just reading Pisukim after Pisukim after Pisukim. We're just reading, the text of the Haggadah. It has no real glorification, no Shebah, no Pe'er. So the Hachamim decided to split the Hallel to give a portion of Shebah and Pe'er to that second cup. We didn't have anything for the second cup. If you look finally at the last page that you have there, I broke up for you the sections of the Haggadah. I gave you a little grid. And you can see the first column shows Amram Gaon. The Ben Amram Gaon, as I said, is the earliest source that we have for a full Haggadah text. Notice, yes to all the sections. The problem is we don't know what was really written by Amram Gaon and what was tampered with over the ages through later hands. His works got to all sections of the Middle East, to North Africa, to Europe, both East and West Europe, and over time we don't know what really came from Amram Gaon. We attribute things to him that we can detect are definitely from him, but we don't know if everything in the works that we have, whether they be manuscripts or printed forms, are all really his. But as far as we're concerned, the books that we have today from Amram Gaon have all the sections.
You mean that it was maybe interpreted a different way?
Not interpreted later way, but as time went on, people had their, again, there was no printing until about 1470. Okay, so until that time, let's say you're 1300s, you have a book, you'd write in your own extra things. There's already a handwritten book, so the scribe would, add more text to it based upon what was done in your family, in your city, in your village, in your country, whatever was done, and that became the text of this Sidur Amram Gaon that the people were using.
What year is that, Joe?
Amram Gaon, we're talking about approximately 800 Common Era. Sa'adiyya Gaon is about 100 years later, and his version is much better known to us to be authentic because it was not circulated. It was only discovered much later on, as we mentioned a number of times tonight. His Halach Ma'anya is much shorter than ours today. It's only one line. Okay? Manishtana he has. Abadim Hayinu he only has half of it. Ma'aseh bir Aizah doesn't exist. Amar bil Azab bin Azariya doesn't exist. The Baruch HaMakom section, he admits the first couple of lines, only starts from Kineged. Metahila he has, Baruch Shomer Habtahato he has, Hisha'amda he has, Se'ul Mat he has, but he has it with slight omissions. Like I mentioned, you have the Pisukim and then the explanation of the Pisukim. He doesn't give you the full Pasuk of these 4 Pisukim. He just gives you the headline of each one. Okay, so he'll tell you Vayahor and he'll explain Vayahor. He didn't show you where the Vayahor came from. All the Rabbi Yosef Galili and Bidei Aizah, Rabbi Akiva, Kama Ma'al Tuvot, and Dayenu, all that doesn't exist at all in Sa'adiyya Gaon, but he mentions that there are sections at this point that others say. He doesn't even tell you what those sections are. We just know about them from Harambam. Harambam doesn't have them in his listing, as you see on that 3rd column, or the 4th column rather, but his son, Rabbi Abraham, talks about their family customs and said, even though my father did not put this in his Mishneh Torah, within the family itself, it was our minhag to say it. So again, you have what Harambam is telling you, the regular text of the Haggadah, and then within the family itself, they had a custom where they added things. Okay, so if you add things or you delete things, as long as it falls into the confines of what the halakha is, you're okay. And that's basically it. Unless anybody has questions, we discussed the text, we discussed, the halachot, we discussed minhagim, we discussed development, at least as far as I think I did. Yes, doctor.
I have a question. You had mentioned that in the Gemara it talks about rice as being one of the food substances. So, and how did the Ashkenazim deal with that?
I don't know. I don't know. I guess, again, I think it really has to do with the problem of how the rice was stored and packed in their countries, where it was, put into, let's say, burlap bags with regular wheat flour. Exactly. I think really that was the main issue more than anything else. But again, there's different opinions as to why different kotniyot, like rice and legumes, are forbidden in different communities.
And this idea of my grandmother, Aleh Shalom, used to go through the rice 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
It was minhag, or is that the halakha like that?
There's no halakha that has to be 3 times. It's a minhag that they did it because the rice back then was a lot dirtier than it is today.
Right, why go through 1 bag of the whatever rice 1 time?
Well, it should be sufficient, unless you've already had experience where you found it to be dirty and you do end up finding, wheat or barley or what are the particles there.
My question is it halakha to go through it even once?
Rabbis are in front of you.
You're a rabbi tonight.
That's all right, I'm sitting down in a minute, you can answer him afterwards.
But sticking to the minhag, whatever it is, just
Yeah.
we have a makor.
Do we have a makor for checking the rice? We have, all our hachamim talk about checking the rice. Okay, about as far as 3 times, most of them do not mention it, as 3 times. We have later hadorim that mention 3 times. Chamuya Yosef, Ben Ishai, Kaf Hayim Sofer, they mentioned the 3 times. Again, all in the Iraqi tradition also. They mentioned the 3 times. We don't really have other sources that talk about 3 times as far as I know. Anybody else? Yes, Shirley.
The words Pesach Matzah Maror that we all have to say.
Right. That's mentioned directly in the Mishnah. And it's, in fact, to say Pesach Matzah Maror is wrong. You have to say Pesach Matzah Umrorim. Okay, because maror is one of the 5 types of bitter herbs that you can eat. The Mishnah talks about the 5 different types of items that you could use for the beracha of alechinat maror. And Harambam talks about it, even Shulchan Aruch talks about it. They all mention 5 different things. Maror is the name of one of the types. So it's really Pesach, Masa, Umrorim. So if you wanted to change that, Jonathan, that's definitely a good thing to change. Okay? No, I mean it in all seriousness. I don't mean it as a joke.
So that they all agree that you have to say.
Everybody agrees, yes. And then you have to do the explanations of them, the 3 paragraphs afterward. They all agree on that as well. Anybody? Yeah, Eli.
My wife's grandfather, Iraqi,
Mhm.
used to eat the egg.
They eat eggs early on. Yes, that's when they eat. The Iraqis eat the eggs at that point. They're hungry. I asked many Iraqis about it. They said that was al minhag. We were very hungry people. Yeah. Alan.
We have the minhag also, if you're gonna divide the eggs, you don't want to eat whole egg, either into odd numbers. You ever hear of that?
I've never heard of it. No, I've not come
In
across
other
it.
words, you don't divide it into half, you divide it into thirds.
I never heard that one. Okay.
The other side of the river.
Nah, maybe.
It's not trouble, man.
Yeah, Mars.
So is there a source for escorting the girl when she takes the wine?
Pure superstition.
How about now looking at it?
Again, more superstition.
How about
Doing it.
That's all. Pouring the wine is a class by itself, that's why I didn't bring it up at all, but that definitely does not exist in any early sources. It's a much later thing. Pouring out wine, when you say, all that is a much later thing, and that the class by itself, that's an hour and a half by itself. So that's why I didn't bring it up. Same reason I didn't bring up the korech, as to how to make the korech. Okay? Everybody thinks you take a piece of masa and you put a piece of lettuce and you dip it. It's wrong. You have to be using soft masa according to all the early sources, and that's the only kind of masa they had. They made fresh masa every day, by the way, and you had to actually roll it with the lettuce on the outside and the masa on the inside. Okay, like a spring roll type of thing. Yes, lettuce on the outside, that on the inside. That way you're looking at it and you dip it like that. Again, it's a whole long. Again, it's another long class. All right, we're good tonight. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much.